Hello and welcome. Welcome to Battlefield 1 podcast. I actually can't believe I'm saying that. Welcome to Battlefield 1 podcast. A podcast that was basically retired a couple of years ago because Battlefield being Battlefield. So, welcome to Battlefield 1 podcast. Welcome to this reboot of the show that started back in 2015. 14 or 15? 15. And yeah, we're going to talk about Battlefield, we're going to talk about stuff. I'm going to explain everything what's going on with the podcast because some of you are probably really confused. Why is this suddenly appearing on Spotify under episode 1? Why there's a reboot and so on? Did a new Battlefield game go announced or something like that? Well, I will explain everything. I will try my best to explain everything in this episode and we'll keep going from there. And before we continue, I'm Tom, aka the Lanky Soldier. You probably know me, but I'll talk about that later. And if you don't want to watch the whole thing, you don't want to watch the whole episode because it's too long or whatever the reason may be, we have time codes in the description of this episode, so you can always, click on the topic you want, go on a time code you like, the topic you want to listen to that, and you don't have to listen to the whole thing. Just making it easier for you, so yeah. And follow me, my socials and everything that are in the description, YouTube, Twitter, whatever that may be, at TheLankySoldier, the same name everywhere, you'll find me. If it says TheLankySoldier, you'll find me. And if you, of course, want to support the show, granted, this is episode 1, this is episode 43 technically, but this is a reboot of the show, the reboot of this podcast, but if you want to support the channel, you want to support me, and support the everything I do on my YouTube and I do with live gathering podcast and everything. Like I said, I'm gonna talk about myself. For the new listeners that thinking, what the fuck is this? The more I'll explain in a moment. So if you want to support the podcast or the show and everything, get one week early access to Battlefield 1 podcast. So you can always check out our Patreon at TheLankySoldier. And it's not going to be just Battlefield. You're going to find extra episodes of live gaming gathering, extra videos of behind the scenes, longer videos of all the stuff I don't post on the channel, all that kind of stuff. Just check out, patreon.com/TheLankySoldier. Check out. Maybe you'll find something that you really like. And if you want to support the podcast, it's always appreciated. So, and of course, the most important thing, if you're listening this podcast on Spotify, iTunes, I was thinking doing the video version of this podcast, but I realized no, I'm just gonna do the audio version of the podcast for now because it's a reboot. I'm starting it slowly, bringing it back. I'm not rushing it. There's no point in rushing it with everything regarding Battlefield right now, especially when it comes to podcasts. So I'm taking it slowly. So for now, it's going to be audio version only. So it's going to be on Spotify, iTunes, and whenever you're listening to the podcast, on Amazon Music, whenever you listen to the audio version of the podcasts, it's probably going to be there. So yeah, the reason why I said that is because if you want to support the show, let people find the podcast, leave a rating, I know Spotify you can leave a rating, and I know iTunes you can leave a rating, so leave a rating, let other people discover the podcast, let them know that we're back talking about Battlefield. So yeah, that's kind of it. That's the introduction and everything, so let's get started, I guess. So, my name is Tom, aka the Lanky Soldier. I run a YouTube channel called The Lanky Soldier, where I make video essays and I host a live gaming gathering podcast with Ray Edmunds, who's my co-host. And I've been doing YouTube for 5-6 years, I think. I can't remember. I can't remember the exact date, but roughly that. With big time gaps of it's just with big time gaps. I literally just took a break for a year or two. Well, it was more like a year, but I was still posting videos, but it wasn't never really consistent. And only last year I started to be more consistent with my YouTube channel, and we start posting more videos and everything. And we we relaunched the Live Gamer Gathering podcast, and it's doing really well. I'm kind of surprised how well it's doing. So if you ever want to hear, a podcast that is not just about Battlefield, but about games in general, and just us, bunch of friends coming together, talk about random stuff, you can always check out Live Gamer Gathering podcast, which is basically everywhere. Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, you'll find it. So Live Gamer Gathering podcast, that's us. And yeah, so I've been running a YouTube channel for a while. I'm a EA game changer. I've been since Battlefield 1, I think. So when I say I'm a EA game changer, I'm not one of those people that they instantly go to invite me to events or something like that, record some footage. Because I'm not that type of game changer, because I'm not really that big enough. But I've been an EA game changer for a while, but it's only mostly in name. It's not like I have any special perks or whatever. It's mostly they sometimes give opportunity to me to get invited to certain playtests and just help them, with the game, give them feedback, whatever. Of course, I focus on Battlefield because that's my primary, franchise when it comes to EA games. So I'm an EA game changer. Well, it's called Create a Network now. It's not a game changer anymore. But like I said, I'm only basically a game changer in name. I mostly just join whenever they give me opportunity to join, and I give feedback. Whatever they're trying to test or experiment. For example, thanks to EA, the Create a Network, I had the chance to play the class system with the classes 2-3 months before it got launched. So it was November or something, I can't remember. But thanks to that, I had a chance to play them and give them feedback about the classes, about 2042. That's a lot of twos. So I was happy to provide feedback and playtest the new classes for Battlefield 2042 before it came out, months ahead. And it was a really nice experience. So, and I know I can mention all of this because they mentioned that in the blog post before the classes came out, because they said we had playtests and with the players and everything. So I was one of those players. We had I won't say a small group of players, but a good chunk of players that playtested the classes and gave feedback. And of course there were other sessions that I wasn't invited to, but that's not the point. The point, it was a really positive experience, and a positive experience that we were able to give feedback on something that was not really done in Battlefield 2042, and people were asking for classes, So I'm glad classes are back. So my history with Battlefield, I started with Battlefield 2, but I never really played Battlefield 2 just because I'll admit, I wasn't the smartest kid around when it came to video games, and Battlefield 2 was too complicated for me. I did not enjoy Battlefield 2. Then Bad Company, it was the same thing with 2042 and Battlefield 2 and so on. Then Bad Company 2 came out. I almost said 3, I don't know why. Maybe because people want for Bad Company 3. But anyway, when Bad Company 2 came out, I played it, but it wasn't it. It was not that type of Battlefield game I'm really looking for. It was not a bad game, but I was not enjoying the controls, especially when I was playing on PC back then. Playing on PC, Bad Company 2, it wasn't really a good experience, and I did not enjoy it that much. Then Battlefield 3 came out. That's the first Battlefield game that I actually spent over 500 hours playing. So Battlefield 3 was definitely one of those games that I yep, Battlefield is definitely my type of franchise. And of course Battlefield 4, Battlefield 1, Battlefield 5, and even Hardline. During Battlefield 4, I was part of community test environment. So community test environment, for whoever doesn't know, that back in the day it was a thing. It was a separate client of the game where developers were testing and experimenting new features and new content. And you were able to join community test environment if you're a premium player. You had premium back in Battlefield 4, so you were able to join the community test environment and download this separate client of the game and give feedback and test stuff and everything. And I was part of this club. I was part of this club, or no. Here's the thing: I don't want to say it was a club. It was more like a group, a small niche group consisting of passionate Battlefield players like me. So there was this group called BFXP, basically it translates to Battlefield Experience Group. And it was a group of players, or passionate Battlefield players, that came together. And back then there was no Discord, so all of us were on Skype. So it was a group of passionate Battlefield players that came together, and we all gathered on Skype in a group Skype chat. And there were developers in there. There were, us there, and it was a nice little group where people gave, their feedback regarding anything that was happening with Battlefield 4 in its, community test environment. That's where some ideas were tested. That's where some people were really passionate about Battlefield, giving feedback, giving ideas. Sometimes, some of them were moderating certain forums or bug. There was a website where you could provide bug reports. So we had people moderating that, and they giving to developers. It was a nice niche, small group of Battlefield players that were really passionate about Battlefield, and developers that were really passionate about Battlefield. DICE developers were passionate about, and all of us were just working together, making sure that Battlefield 4 is in a really good state. So I was part of that group, and it was a really nice experience, really educational experience for me personally, just because I was learning so many things, about game development, what works for Battlefield game, what doesn't work for Battlefield game, what people want, what people don't want. It was such an eye-opener, and it was really such an amazing experience to be part of, because basically that kind of, what's the word I would say, not educated, more like it left an impact on me as a player and as a wannabe game developer, what I want from a Battlefield game. Not just what I want from other Battlefield games, or just what I want from other games in that matter, It kind of formed that opinion in me, left an impact that is still present to this day. So it was a nice, valuable experience for all of us. I don't talk to anyone from that group anymore, except for a couple of developers and a couple of people. For one of them is my co-host for Live Gaming Gathering, Ray Edmunds. So we met before that group got founded, but I still, he's my co-host, he's my friend, I still talk to him, we host the podcast together. But I don't really talk to people, from that group that much, or just because they either disappeared or they don't play Battlefield or whatever that may be. And I used to play Friday Night Battlefield, when it was a bit smaller group. It was just a small group on Discord or TeamSpeak, So not like it's a big thing right now. Like every time you go on Battlefield 2042, you always see Friday Night Battlefield's up. You can join and play. It wasn't like that. It was just a small niche community, a small group of players, developers, EA employees, just Battlefield players just coming together and play some, Battlefield games. So that was a nice thing. But yeah, that's my basically experience, my history with Battlefield. Of course, there's I forgot, I was a moderator at BattlefieldOne CTE forums, Reddit and Discord, but it wasn't that big. It wasn't like an important role, whatever. It was just I want to say time waster, because it wasn't really time wasting, but it was an interesting experience to moderate the forums. Make sure that people don't fucking kill each other in the forums. So that was quite something. I made some trailers for Battlefield 5 and Battlefield 1, especially Battlefield 1. So, I've been drinking tea as I'm recording, so I might burp once in a while. So please excuse me. But yeah, I made some trailers for Battlefield 1, and the reason, and you probably saw them, so because those trailers managed to get like about 6-7 million views. So you probably saw one of those Battlefield 1 trailers at one point in your life if you're a big Battlefield fanboy like me or a fangirl. And it's definitely it was an experience. And the reason why I was making those Battlefield 1 trailers in the first place is because DICE was not making any Battlefield trailers when they were dropping their content for Battlefield 1. And because of CT, they had early access, I was just, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna make my own trailer. I'm gonna make my own Battlefield trailer, and people really liked that and managed to get 6-7 million views, which is really fantastic. But yeah, I was making trailers, it was really fun and all that kind of stuff. What else I can talk about myself? So me and a couple of other players, let's talk about this podcast a little bit. We, back in the day, when we were part of BFXP, Battlefield Experience Group, we were thinking to make a Battlefield podcast. A podcast dedicated to explaining, discussing, announcing certain news that were happening with Battlefield 4 CTE. Because back in the day, there was a lot of things happening with Battlefield 4 CTE, with the community test environment. It was a lot of things happening, and we decided, you know what? To spread the news or the awareness of what's happening with Battlefield, we decided to make a Battlefield-related podcast. And we did. And with the encouragement for certain developers, because before we started doing that, we asked the developers, do you think a Battlefield-related podcast would be a really nice idea? Because back then there was none. There was no Battlefield-related podcast. Like there was no shows, no nothing. Yeah, there were YouTubers, but there was never really a podcast. Just people gathering around and talking about Battlefield and discussing the news and everything. So, and there was a lot of things happening during that time. So making a podcast back then was a smart idea. So back then we called it Battlefield, I can't remember, what was it called? Battlefield Experience Podcast or something like that. We managed to do 2 episodes of that. Then we decided it wasn't not user-friendly, more like people could not find the podcast. It was a really specific term and the name and everything. It was really niche and it wasn't really specific. It wasn't mainstream enough. So we did a little rebrand of the podcast, and we were thinking, what kind of name what kind of name we can give it to the podcast that makes sense. And that was before Battlefield 1 was announced. So, like, we're talking a year or 2 before the game was announced. So we're thinking, okay, what kind of name we can have for the podcast? And there were some names thrown around and everything, like really ridiculous ones and really smart ones. But Ray, my co-host at Live Gaming Gathering Podcast, he decided, you know what? Let's call it the Battlefield 1. Because there's no Battlefield 1. There's no game called Battlefield 1. There's nothing that indicate that they will make a game called Battlefield 1. Why would they make a Battlefield 1 when you're at Battlefield 4, right? Why would you do that? Naturally the next games will be called Battlefield 5 or Battlefield something, but not 1. Do you think they will be that crazy enough to go, name the next game Battlefield 1? They will not even name their, any upcoming apps or mobile games or whatever called, Battlefield 1. It was it's not taken. There was nothing like that ever before. It's easily searchable. And yes, so we named the Battlefield podcast, we named it Battlefield 1 Podcast. Because it just made sense back then. It was such a genius idea to call it Battlefield 1, and we stuck with that. And next thing you know, a year later, 20 something episodes in, I think it was like 30 maybe episodes. Yeah, 30 episodes, more than 30 episodes. EA and DICE announced that, oh, Battlefield 1 is a thing. And I'm pretty sure I need to find an episode where we talk about that, like where we literally demanding EA to pay us royalties for that name, because yeah, that was quite an experience to know that our podcast is literally named after the next game that is coming out. And we named the podcast like years ago before the game was announced, and I was like, wow, we struggled. And we did. A lot of people started to listen to the podcast because, I don't know, it's because Google was recommending us because of the name, or people were like, oh, these guys were like, nailed something, you know. Whatever the reason may be, we had a really nice audience for Battlefield 1 podcast back then, and we did 43 episodes. 42 episodes. And it was a good time. But, of course, as time went on, and the way Battlefield was going into the direction that all of us were not really a big fan of, we realized that we were kind of repeating ourselves with each episode. So everything we were discussing about, like, specific things or whatever, it was nice for a little bit. But we realized it was kind of pointless. Because it's not only pointless that we were repeating ourselves once in a while because there was nothing else happening with Battlefield 1 and all that kind of stuff and the rest of the, franchise. We were repeating ourselves because it was just, it was, every episode almost sounded the same. And no matter how positive or enthusiastic we were at the beginning, making the podcasts, for the first 30, 40, not 40, more like for the first 30 episodes, as time went on, we were really, really cynical and more like angry and disappointed because certain stuff just made us angry in the Battlefield, I know people love Battlefield 1. A lot of people look at Battlefield 1 right now as a really good, amazing thing that happened. But back in the day, when the game came out, it was lacking. And I mean lacking a lot of features and a lot of stuff that made Battlefield games fun. So Battlefield 1 was like the first game, like the first start of, I would say, degradation of the franchise. Like, they had some good ideas with Battlefield 1. For example, like Battlelog. Whoever doesn't know, Battlelog back in the day, it was a web browser, it was a website where you launched your game through. So Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4, back in the day, you could only launch the game through that website. And that website had all your stats, it had the forums, it had, the servers, the server list and everything, filters, whatever that may be. It was like the Facebook of Battlefield. It was Battlefield Facebook, back in the day. And that's how you were able to join games, and it was through that website. And it was really, now people look at it was like a really amazing thing, but back then people really complained about that. Like, oh, why you have to open the browser to launch a game? It's stupid. So when Battlefield 1 came out, they never had Battlelog. But they did hire the guy who was doing like stats or hosting his own website, for hosting servers or something. I can't remember. Like, they hired some people that were really, really, really good at that. Providing the infrastructure for Battlefield games. So they hired, those specific people to make sure that they can deliver that kind of infrastructure that we have with Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 to Battlefield 1 and other future games, to make it everything client-side. Sadly, that did not happen, whatever the case may be. I don't know the whole story. Thing is, that never happened. They never transferred Battlelog to Battlefield 1. And since then, all the features that we used to love back in Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4, or even Battlefield 2 in that matter, were not present in Battlefield 1 and beyond. So the Battlefield 1 was kind of the start of the degradation of the franchise. Even though a lot of people, new people especially, it brought a new set of a brand new player base to the game, to the franchise, because they never played Battlefield, they never, cared or heard about Battlefield, but because Battlefield 1 was so unique compared to other shooters, that brought a lot of people to Battlefield, like a new player base, and it was really exciting. So that's why a lot of people gave Battlefield 1 a chance to be its own thing, so people treated it as a sidestep in the franchise. It wasn't a back step, or it wasn't like 2 steps back or whatever that counted. No, it was just it was a sidestep. It wasn't bad, it wasn't good. It was just a sidestep, and it brought a lot of new people to the franchise. Did well sales-wise. Did amazing sales-wise. Even though it still could not outsell Call of Duty, but that's not the point. Still, it sold really well. It brought a lot of new players to the franchise. Game age really fine right now, and it was really exciting. Okay, we might be not happy with Battlefield 1, but it brought a new set of players to the game, to the franchise. So that means the next game will be much bigger and much more ambitious and more. It's not like Battlefield 1 wasn't ambitious. No, that's quite the opposite. Battlefield 1 was really ambitious game. But we can actually start improving stuff that was not perfect in Battlefield 1 for the next game. But anyway, I'm not here to talk about the history of Battlefield 1 or what's happening with the franchise. The point of this episode, particularly this one, is to discuss why I am rebooting Battlefield 1 podcast. And the reason I'm telling you about this history about Battlefield 1 and everything is because why we stopped doing Battlefield 1 podcast in the first place. So like I said, we were getting angry, we were getting low-key depressed, we were not enthusiastic about all the topics we were talking about in Battlefield 1 podcast, because it's not interesting to listen, and it's just stupid, and it's very toxic, and we were forcing ourselves to record another episode because there was nothing to talk about. And it's funny that when I listen to other Battlefield podcasts that are active right now, they all start. I was really paying attention because I'm really curious what other people doing with Battlefield podcasts. I'm really curious, so I do listen to all of them because I want to know different perspectives on how people react. But one thing is for sure, all of them start with good intentions. Every Battlefield podcast I listen to always started with good intentions. I don't know if you can hear the siren in the background, but that's what you get for living in London. So I'm sorry about that. So they all start with good intentions, and they're all positive, all excited in the first, 10, 20 episodes or whatever. All really exciting and good. But as time went on, they always end up the same. They start to become more cynical. They become more angry, more disappointed. And they're just like, why is this even a thing? And it's not really, I'm not blaming them, honestly. I am not blaming them, I'm not blaming the hosts of those podcasts for becoming that way. Because I've been there myself. And it's really, really frustrating thing to experience. Because when you try to be positive and everything, but when there's nothing to be positive about as time goes on, you realize, wow, Battlefield as a franchise is really, what's the word? Not underperforming, but just like under-delivers in a lot of aspects that you would imagine would be standard by now, but apparently it's not. I can talk about Battlefield 2042 for hours, why I do not like that game, but that's not why I'm rebooting the Battlefield 1 podcast in the first place. So, the thing is about Battlefield 1 podcast is because the reason I decided to reboot this podcast is because I want to try to be that one particular... I want to be the first. I don't want to be the ultimate change. I don't want to be the revolution of Battlefield 1 for Battlefield. I don't want to be the revolution of Battlefield podcast or Battlefield content creation. I don't want to be the revolution. I want to be the first starting block of changing the narrative when it comes to Battlefield. Because let's just put everything on the table. Let's be honest with ourselves. Battlefield 2042 is not a good game. I don't care what you say, what's your opinion, no matter how much you enjoy the game. Even if you're a brand new Battlefield player and this is your first ever Battlefield game and you don't understand what's the hate and everything, that's fine. If you enjoy Battlefield 2042, that's okay. That's fine. That's more power to you, and no one should tell you otherwise. But deep down, we all know that Battlefield 2042 deserves better. But it won't get better. This is what we get. You can improve you can fix some bugs, you can improve some stuff, you can make it better in certain cases, but you will not fix the game until you focus on the foundation of the game. But they won't focus on the foundation of the game because the game is already out. So it's too expensive, it's too much resources, needed to fix the game to be good, and that's not gonna happen. And it's obvious. I mean, it's just the most worst kept secret out there. Not even secret because EA already announced it. They're already working on the next game. So Season 5 is going to be the last season we're going to get for Battlefield 2042. That's going to be the last season. Mark my words. I've been saying this for months. And they're going to move their skeleton crew, whatever team is working on this game, to the next game. Because that's the priority. Now you're probably thinking, well, why the fuck I'm rebooting the podcast? Well, I'm rebooting the podcast because, like I said, I want to be the first starting block of building a foundation of changing the narrative when we talk about Battlefield. So instead of us focusing, at least, starting positive, let's talk about Battlefield 2042 changes. What's the next game gonna be like? Let's be excited. What kind of changes we want to see, all that kind of stuff. Instead of starting that and then be negative as time goes on. It doesn't deliver. The next game is shit and blah blah blah. I want to focus of us talking about something that makes Battlefield Battlefield. I want to change the narrative when it comes to this franchise because I want this franchise to be good, and I want the narrative to be changed towards something that will change the game for the franchise for the positive. So when I say I want to make it positive, I don't want to make it force positive, but I do want to discuss important yet good stuff that is happening in Battlefield games. Because even though Battlefield 2042 is a colossal disaster and disappointment, it still has a lot of good stuff there that can be applied to other games, and it can be a perfect example for other games. I will not talk about those stuff right now because I will focus on other podcasts, like other episodes, but we need to change the narrative, and in a sense, I want to bring some education, I want to bring some good talking points, I want to bring, a positive change for this franchise, instead of us bitching on Twitter, Reddit, or whatever, about anything that there's no point complaining about. For example, people complain about, Fortnite colors. It's the most stupidest argument I ever read on the internet when it comes to cosmetics in a video game. Fortnite. I'm sorry. Do you live in a black and white or gray and brown world? Is your whole life is like that? And I remember I saw a tweet saying like, oh, we don't want colors. Battlefield developers don't understand what the Battlefield fan base want. We want this. We want gritty, realistic aesthetics and all that kind of stuff. Like, I agree that Battlefield 2042 should went a bit more gritty with its aesthetics, but people complain about the cosmetics and everything. You have to understand that's not an argument. It's like it doesn't make sense on a grander scale when it comes to the Battlefield games. What makes a Battlefield game? What this realistic aesthetic? So-called realistic aesthetic. That's not what makes a Battlefield game. Because there's loads of Battlefield games that's so different from each other, but they're still Battlefield games. Even though Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 are somewhat similar in a sense, but they're so completely different games. What about Battlefield Heroes, like a wannabe Fortnite game, like that you can't play anymore? Battlefield Heroes or Bad Company 2, or even Battlefield Hardline, it's not the most liked Battlefield game out there, but there's some people that really like Battlefield Hardline for whatever it is. And I have to agree that Hardline did have some good ideas there and there. We can't ignore that. So the point of this podcast that me and Ray talked about, we want to reboot this podcast. We want to focus on the positive aspects of this franchise. We don't want to be chasing trends. We don't want to chase news. Like certain podcasts right now, like Battlefield-related podcasts, they follow what the news say. Whatever dies, release. Because after the news is over, like after they will drop Battlefield 2042, what's next? Why, it's going to be months of silence, if not years of silence while they're working on the game in the background? Why are you going to talk about that? Was thinking about that. What's the point of rebooting the Battlefield 1 podcast if there's nothing to talk about? And I realized, wait, we can talk about this for ages and ages. We can talk about Battlefield for ages as long as we focus on the right stuff. So the point of this reboot is to let's focus on the news. Let's focus on the particular news points or topics or whatever, but focus on the positive, important stuff that is interesting to listen. So, because Battlefield is a lot of things to a lot of different people, because Battlefield is so generational. It's not like Call of Duty. Even though there's a different Call of Duty every year, and a lot of people, grew up with a different Call of Duty, it's not the same though, because it's always kind of remained the same, through with each new game. But Battlefield, for better or worse, it was different with each game. It's a completely different experience compared to the previous game. A new game, it's not going to be the same game as you played 5-10 years ago or 2 years ago, whatever that may be. Each Battlefield game is such a different experience that you can't really put in one box. You can't really put into one particular thing. So when people say oh, I speak for the whole Battlefield community, we don't want this. Okay, which Battlefield community? Because the community is fragmented into different sectors and different parts. They have their own opinions and their own ideas what makes Battlefield a Battlefield game. Just because you think this is shit doesn't mean that someone else doesn't find it interesting. For example, like Battlefield 1 game, like I said, I am not the biggest fan of Battlefield 1. I never liked Battlefield 1 on that scale. They're like, yeah, it's a good game though. I do not like Battlefield 1. And I did not really enjoy Battlefield 1 because I stopped playing half through it. I was just making trailers, which I enjoyed. I did not enjoy Battlefield 1, and I still not enjoyed. But I will not ignore the facts that a lot of people did enjoy that game. A lot of new players joined Battlefield franchise thanks to that game. And we cannot ignore that because a lot of people grew up with a different Battlefield game. Some people grew up with Battlefield Company 2. Some people grew up with Battlefield 3. Some people Battlefield 4. Some with Battlefield 1. Some even with 2042. They don't... People that join, playing Battlefield 2042 as their first Battlefield game, they have no idea. They have no idea what's right or wrong for a Battlefield game. They just play another video game, another first-person shooter. And they're like, this is fun. And they continue playing. Battlefield means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And you can't put that into one genre. So that's why I want to focus on this podcast. I just want to make sure, I want to highlight that all the different aspects that this franchise has, like what kind of things it brings to a lot of different people. I want to highlight all the positives from all these games that came out and the future games that are coming out. I want to focus on the positive things that make Battlefield. I came to that, I realized that Battlefield is not about one specific game or one specific feature or a specific setting or a specific whatever they may be. It's never about one particular thing. It's just not. A lot of different things make Battlefield fun. And a lot of things make Battlefield really bad. And I want to make sure that we discuss those points, that we discuss all the important aspects of why we enjoy this franchise, why we start playing Battlefield in the first place. Even though Battlefield 2042 is not a good game, but it did some good things. It did some right things that, like I said, other games can take an example from. And we cannot ignore that. So that's kind of the idea I am aiming for with Battlefield. So Battlefield 1 podcast. And it's not going to be a weekly podcast. Because we're going to have so much downtime between now and the new Battlefield game. It's going to be a year, 2, I don't know. Ray suggested they will announce something this year. And no, I can assure they will not announce anything this year. And maybe they in some, what's it called? EA earnings call? Maybe. But it's just going to be a mention that they're working on. That's it. I am not expecting anything this year, but even then, I want to make sure that this podcast is going on a steady pace before the new game comes out. And right now, the plan is to make it monthly. So a new episode every month. This month, I will make 2 episodes. Just because it's a reboot. Because the first episode, this episode you're listening right now, doesn't really count as an episode just because it's like a introduction of what I'm trying to achieve with this podcast. And it's a challenging thing. It's a really challenging thing to make, talk about Battlefield every month to be interesting. But that's the point. I don't want to chase trends. I don't want to chase news. I want to talk about something that makes Battlefield, what makes it fun. So for now, I will try to... We're only doing audio version of the podcast. I did mention, at the start of the podcast of this episode, that I was exploring the idea of making video maybe. But because we're starting from scratch again, we're basically starting the whole podcast from scratch. For now, we're going to do audio version only. We're not going to do YouTube yet, because I don't think there's any point. And also, I will not have time to edit the video version of the podcast yet, because I don't do YouTube full time. I don't do podcasting full time. But if you want to support us, patreon.com/TheLankySoldier. Because we have other stuff too that we're working on. We're still working on live gaming gathering podcast. I'm still working on videos that I post on YouTube. All of that takes time. And I have a job that I need to pay the bills somehow. So I still have a job. I still have a job, and I'm still working on my YouTube channel, and I'm still working on the podcast. There's a lot of content that you get on Patreon, for example. We need to make sure that the patrons that support the show, the podcast, the channel, and so on, I need to make sure they get the content they pay for. So that's another thing. So that's why I'm not doing a video version of the podcast yet, just because there's a lot of things I need to focus on right now, and that I just don't have the time. But yeah, so for now we're gonna do audio version only. That's the plan. And yeah, I'm just looking at my notes. Yeah, instead of focusing on the news, I'll take a different approach. I'll focus on the aspects that make Battlefield great. I do want to bring some guests to the show. I do want to bring some guests to this podcast. For example, on Live Gaming Gathering, episode 29 or 30, we had Flagfire. If you're a big Battlefield, player and you watch YouTube, you probably heard of Flagfire. He makes some really amazing Battlefield videos. So we had him on the podcast, and we talked about Battlefield, we talked about life, we talked about content creation. It wasn't just focused on Battlefield, but it was just focused on everything. It was an interview with him about basically everything. And that was the point of that is literally the point of Live Gaming Gathering podcast, is to discuss that kind of stuff which you can't really discuss in a video. So we had a really amazing podcast at Live Gaming Gathering. It's episode 29, interview with Flagfire. It was an amazing episode. So I want to bring Flagfire. We did talk about, Flag, when you want to come back on the podcast. We just need to organize the time when we're all free and everything. But if Battlefield 1 podcast is coming back, I will gladly bring him on this show. I do want to bring certain people to the show and just discuss about Battlefield, whatever that may be, whatever they want to talk about and they can't talk about in a video or whatever the case may be. I will ask them if they want to join and talk about Battlefield. I think it's a win-win for all of us. So yeah, of course, I will bring Ray, my co-host for Live Gaming Gathering podcast. Of course, I'll bring Ray to talk about Battlefield because he has loads of stuff to talk about. It's insane. We can talk about Battlefield for days and days and days. So that's that. And yeah, so that's kind of it. That's the idea. So conclusion is we're rebooting the show. We are rebooting Battlefield 1 podcast, basically out of nowhere, but it's not out of nowhere. I've been thinking about it for months. And it will have a similar concept. This podcast will have a similar concept as Live Gaming Gathering, because that concept has been serving us really well, because it helps people to discover the podcast. It helps people, think about stuff, because we don't rely on news. We don't really do news. We focus on something that we really want to talk about, wherever that may be. So I want to apply the same concept and idea from Live Gaming Gathering to Battlefield 1 podcast, where we just talk about something that we really want to talk about. And hopefully that will bring some people to the podcast, all listeners and new listeners, wherever they may be. Yeah, that's kind of it. And I don't know what else to say. Other than that, just, thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to my ramblings. I had some notes. I understand that I was all over the place regarding, this reboot, this whatever this is right now, this first episode. It's messy. It's really messy. I agree. So please do forgive me that it's really messy. It's just the first episode. I also want to see how people react to this. I want to see what people think that is the right thing to do. I will see the feedback. I'll see what people think about what things can be changed. What kind of things you'd love to see on the Battlefield 1 podcast. Not see, listen right now. Listen, because it's only audio version. But yeah, so that's kind of it. Yeah, so I guess I'll see you guys on the next episode. Next episode, we'll talk about we will talk about the state of Battlefield. So I already mentioned a little bit here, but I talked about Battlefield 2042 and Battlefield 1 and all that kind of stuff. I did mention already, but next episode, I want to bring more depth to that conversation, like to that topic. So we'll discuss the state of Battlefield, what's right, what's wrong, what's happening. Just give us a context what we're dealing with. What we're dealing with Battlefield and what can be changed and what kind of ideas we can, implement. All that kind of stuff. There's certain things that I just want to talk about, and I want to talk about with Ray, for example. I want to I see when Ray is free, so we can talk about Battlefield, its current state, and just discuss stuff. So yeah, that's kind of it. Other than that, like I said, leave us a rating on Spotify and iTunes. Check out our Patreon. For 1 week, one whole week of early access for Battlefield 1 podcast. Leave a rating, check our socials, and give us feedback. Contact me on Twitter or wherever. We do have a Twitter account. Contact me, whenever, because I have my own personal website too, so you can always, just Google Tom Bellows, Tom without the H, Belous, just Google my name, go on my website, contact me through there, wherever that may be. You can find me anywhere. The Lanky Soldier, you can find me anywhere. I'm almost on every platform you can find, so you can give me feedback just fine. And yeah, that's kind of it. So thank you guys for listening. Thank you for listening to my really disorganized episode right now. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. See you on the battlefield. Have a good time. Be nice to others. Don't be a douchebag. And yeah, we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.